It's not easy to be a servant, and it's certainly not easy to suffer while being a servant. And yet, that's what we're called to do by the Apostle Peter in our lesson for today. Hi, my name is John McKeel, and I'm the author of the little book, Peter, the Friend of Jesus Speaks. It's a short commentary on 1 Peter. Let's jump right into our lesson where Peter writes, "Servants, be subject to your masters with all respect, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the unjust. For this is a gracious thing. When mindful of God, one endures sorrows while suffering unjustly. For what credit is it if, when you sin and are beaten for it, you endure? But if, when you do good and suffer for it, you endure, this is a gracious thing in the sight of God. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. By his wounds you've been healed, for you were straying like sheep, but have now returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls." 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 18 through 25. Christ's life on earth and death on the cross left us an example to follow. Peter says Jesus committed no sin, and he was honest in his speech, didn't repay evil for evil, and never resorted to threats. Our task is to follow his example. He committed no sin. Think about it. Peter knew Jesus. He was one of the three apostles that was with Christ when Jesus healed the daughter of Jairus and when Jesus was transfigured on the mountain. Peter followed Jesus night and day in good times and bad for 3 years, and here concludes, he committed no sin. That's an amazing statement, and it's an incredible goal for us to follow. But we aren't perfect. We will continue to sin, but that is not our desire. The Apostle John wrote, "If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness." 1 John chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. There was only one perfect person, but disciples are committed to growing. We are out of the sin business, as one old preacher explained to me. Yes, we stumble. Yes, we sin. But what matters is where we go from there. John says there are 2 steps to help us grow. The first is to recognize when we sin, and the second is to admit it. Did you see that phrase? No deceit was found in his mouth. Deceit is one of the 5 evil attributes new Christians must especially guard against. The Greek word doulos describes, quote, taking advantage through craft and underhanded methods, deceit, cunning, treachery. It's a fast-talking salesman whose only concern is making the deal. It even describes a fishing lure that deceives the fish into biting the hook. In the first chapter of John, Philip brings his friend Nathanael to meet Jesus. Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said of him, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael was an honest man. Later in this letter, chapter 3, verse 10, Peter will quote from Psalm 34, verses 12 and 13. "Whoever desires to love life and see good days will keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit." Likewise, Jesus did not repay evil for evil. The word is kakos. That even sounds bad, doesn't it? Kakos. The world might consider turnabout fair play, but that can never be true for a Christian. Stephen, the first Christian martyr, followed the example of Christ when the people were stoning him to death. Rather than calling down curses on his killers, his last words were, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them." And when he had said this, he fell asleep. Acts chapter 7, verse 60. Likewise, Jesus did not threaten. People make threats when they're frightened or angry, and Jesus was neither. Making threats is unworthy of a child of God, and so is a lack of faith and confidence. Jesus is the Good Shepherd. Peter's first letter has one of the most beautiful descriptions of the work of an elder. That's in chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. Here, Peter introduces the work of a pastor by looking to the example of Jesus. The apostle uses two words that are used to describe elders. One, shepherd or pastor, and overseer. We can learn what God expects from elders by looking to the example of Jesus, the Good Shepherd. Can you imagine how beautiful it would be to have Jesus as your pastor? Pray for your pastors today. They have a hard job, and we can make it easier by following in the footsteps of Jesus. Won't you do that this week? Thank you for watching. We'll pick up our lesson again next.